have you always been like a macOS user? Were you a Windows user at some point in your life? Have you just always used a Mac? Like, how have you sort of got to where you are now?
No, I was a Windows user all the time, like most of us are. I guess I don't know if you were a Windows user at some point, but um, yeah, Windows when I was a kid, um, that's what I used
Mm.
for quite a long time, all my life basically, until I joined the previous company that I was in, which is Log Me In. They were like the owners of LastPass and Hamachi
Oh,
and
I haven't
GoToMeeting.
heard the name Log
Some
Me In
some
a long time.
Yeah. Well, they changed their name. It's GoTo right now.
Mhm.
GoTo mentioned they better sponsor me. But when I joined there as a what was it, like a field engineer? I used to do a lot of networking stuff. Then I was in the NOC team, like an SRE type of thing. So you get a Mac, right? In other positions, you don't get a Mac. They give you just a Windows. If you're like in customer service and all that stuff, you just get a regular Windows computer.
Mhm.
But if you're in other positions like Devi type of stuff, or if you're gonna be dealing with infrastructure, you usually get a Mac. So that's how I got a Mac. And those were the Intel based Macs. I hated it because it was hot. It was
Uh-huh.
really hot. The keyboard used to get really hot. The fan used to turn on sometimes. I don't think Intel Macs were good at all. I hate Intel Macs, to be honest. Yeah, no, I wouldn't get an Intel MacBook at all.
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
But since I started using that computer there, I just learned Mac.
mhm,
It's difficult when you first start with Mac as things are really different,
mhm,
the
mhm.
desktops and all that stuff, and then the magic mouse and the apps like this and going down. But that's how it all got started. And then uh I cannot go back to Windows. Unix, you know, I can go into the terminal, type all of the commands. I did a lot of stuff with servers,
Mhm, mhm,
so I like that. I like that if I jump into a server, everything is gonna be exactly the same,
mhm,
and
mhm.
Mac OS is the same. On the other hand, if I'm on Windows, it's like, what is this crap? Like it's a completely different environment.
Right.
Commands are not the same. I have to install WSL, if I want to make something. But guess what? The job that I'm on right now, I'm using a Windows computer
Mm.
and I'm using Secure CRT, which is like a terminal, no Tmux, no WSL. So, you know, that's the way life is. That's the way life is.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's how it all got started with the previous job. That's how I knew Mac. I loved it, and that's where I'm on right now.
I used to, so I started computing on Windows. The first system I ever used, I want to say it wasn't my family computer, but I knew someone that had a Windows 98 system, I want to say. Um my original school, they had XP systems. So that was like the main computers I had used at the time. We didn't get a family computer until Vista. My parents, they grew up in like a farming background. They didn't know anything about computers. We didn't have an internet connection until 2007, something around that range, 2006. Um, I did use a Mac for quite a long time. My high school, we had MacBooks. So I used one from there up until I want to say maybe I was like 19 or 20 or so. So I used a Mac for quite a long time, and I haven't used one since then. But when I went from Windows to Mac, I do agree that the transition was weird. It felt very, like, it felt familiar in a way, but different enough where something just felt kinda off. But over time, I got used to it, and I just, when I eventually did go back to Windows for maybe a year or so, I just did not like it. The only reason I went back to Windows is at the time I wasn't using Linux, but my university, their options at the time were Windows or like Windows and Mac were the main things they supported. And I didn't have the money for a new Mac because I had the same MacBook Pro for about 8 years at that point, and it was starting to get a little bit difficult to do stuff. And it was an Intel Mac from 2012 or something like that. So like it ran pretty hot. It wasn't a great experience. So I went back to Windows for a bit and it wasn't great. Eventually I saw one of my professors, I think it was in my Android development class actually. He was using, I think it was i3. Yeah, he was using the i3 window manager on Arch Linux, and I thought it was so weird and so cool, and I kind of just wanted to work out what this thing was myself, and that's how I eventually made my way into Linux. I just delved headfirst in, I think it was in like the third week of a semester, which is the worst time you could ever change your operating system. Don't recommend doing that. I had assignments due in like 3 weeks from that point, and I had to work out how a whole new operating system worked. But trial by fire, I guess. I kind of had to learn as quickly as possible, and I guess learn I did.
Yeah, Linux is tough. I played around with Linux as well. I don't know. Let me think. Maybe like 18 years ago. It was
Okay.
the university. I installed Ubuntu. I met a guy and he was like, "Oh, Ubuntu." Then they send you the disk to your house and the physical disk. And I was like, and it's free. And I was like, but what's the point? And I installed it in my computer. I dual booted Windows and Ubuntu.
Mhm.
And I remember having audio issues. I don't know. I don't remember the name of the program to play music. And I had to go into the terminal and it was like, what the is this? You know?
Yeah.
Um, and I remember that the cube, right? You could move desktops,
Oh, yes,
switch
okay, it
between
definitely
desktops.
was during, yeah, okay. So what did you say, did you say 17 years ago?
I would say around 17 years ago.
That
Yeah,
makes a lot
17,
of
something like
sense,
that.
yeah. So the cube, that was a thing called Compiz, and that's where, like, burning windows came from, and wobbly windows, and all of the, if you go back and look at, like, Linux videos from 2006 on YouTube, everybody was running stuff like that. Like that's kind of what the selling point of Linux was at the time.
Yeah, and it runs faster. And I remember, okay, it runs faster. But I remember about audio issues, and I was like, I had to go into the terminal, paste in some commands, and I was like, I don't know. I just left it there. Didn't continue. Moved back to Windows.
Mhm.
But yeah, I did have my adventure with Ubuntu back in the day.
Mhm.
Now I use it only on servers, right? Debian is my server of choice. I install all of my servers run Debian. I know Ubuntu is what has most of the documentation, more support, and all that. But I thought, like, why Ubuntu? I'll just go to the source and I'll just use Debian. Has worked great
Mhm.
ever since. But yeah, I do play around with Linux still a lot, but only in servers. No
Yeah.
desktop environment at all. Just managing stuff that way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess the fact that you're in a fairly good position to be trying out Linux because you're not trying it from like a blank slate, right? You use macOS in a very Linux-like way. You make use of a lot of Linux software. You're comfortable on the command line because you have that server experience. So, like, you might sort of you may not like the initial experience you get with some of the window managers you try, but it's not like you're going to be entirely lost on how that sort of interaction model works, right? Like a lot of people get tripped up with Linux where they're just not really comfortable using a terminal, not really comfortable using the command line, and they just sort of freak out with that. and like they don't really know how to read documentation and solve problems for themselves. But having that background there, like when I started using Linux, I was coming from a developer background. I was going through my software engineering degree at the time, so I was in the right mindset to try out Linux.
Mm. And that's a question that I have for you as well. Like, if I won't, that's what I've been thinking. I'm not gonna watch videos on how to install Arch because I want to go to the source. I always want to go to the source. If I need to install something, I always like going directly to the documentation. So, would you say the Arch Wiki would be a good place to start, or
Yes.
what is your advice there?
The Arch Wiki is basically the official installation guide on how to install Arch. If there are absolutely videos out there which will guide you through the steps and maybe some additional things you might want to do, but the Arch Linux install guide on the Arch Wiki is like that's the source of how to install Arch.